Welcome. This is open class number 42. I hope it will be a really valuable one to anyone that is tuning in here. We have actually just one question, which is from Adam, one email from Adam. And I also picked out two really important comments from this past week that I wanted to go over. So let's jump in. Nothing is medical advice as usual, just general thoughts and comments. I hope we'll bring a lot of value again to you. And any more announcements? I don't think so. Let's jump in here and look at some of the content we're going to talk about today. Here is our document. So let us start actually from the very top. So this is from John. This is a comment on episode 352. In fact, it is Akshay who said a sleepless night, and John shares the following. As someone who's currently experiencing what you're going through, I can completely understand how you're feeling. I think what you need is some self-compassion and patience with yourself. Recovery is not a linear nor instantaneous experience. There will be ups and downs. Know within yourself that you have the innate ability to sleep well. Just think back of the times when you slept well, not thinking about sleep and what was different then and now is likely nothing. You have it all inside you. You just need to have patience and perseverance to find it again. Remember, a third of your life will be spent sleeping, so having a few bad nights here and there over a lifetime is no big deal. It happens to everyone. Just not attaching great importance to them is key. Every time you meet a roadblock, ask yourself, how would a normal person with no insomnia react? A person not thinking about sleep will likely not be bothered by it. Start behaving like a non-insomniac and forget about the obsession, because there's really nothing there to be worried about, as Sasha said. Eventually, you will become less and less bothered about sleep. And then before you know it, you start sleeping well again. I was really glad when I read this comment. It was like one of those moments where you see like peer support in the comment section, of the type that is very rare to find, I believe. So I'm very happy that whenever I see that going on, I remember one person said like there's gold in the comment section, and this is that type of gold in the comment section. Now, why did I want to read this particular comment? Well, it was really the part where John said, think about how someone who doesn't have trouble sleeping would react to what you are going through. Okay, I think that is super important. And if you check out the success story with Michelle, when Michelle guested, she said something that just I immediately paid attention to. It just stuck, immediately became ingrained in my mind. She said that at some point she said, now if I sleep 2 hours or something like that, it doesn't bother me that much. But she said like 3 months ago, I would have freaked out, which is really interesting. You would think that, the more trouble you have sleeping, the more kind of used to it you get, but it can go in the other direction. You can become more and more sensitized, But the key is to get to that place where Michelle is and what John is talking about here, where, you react to it more like someone who doesn't have trouble sleeping, meaning you sleep, very little, and somebody who hasn't had trouble sleeping sleeps very little. It would be like, that was odd, but doesn't really start like analyzing it or trying to figure out why it happened, etc., which is such a rabbit hole. So I just wanted to thank John for this comment. I think is a very important one. And the question, of course, becomes like, okay, how do I do that? Like, how do I become, how do I kind of react less? There's no easy answer, but it's education is key, understanding. But I just again wanted to highlight this important point that John made, which is, think about how you react to a night like that, like Akshay had, versus someone who hasn't had trouble sleeping, and think about that. Like, think about how the reaction is the problem, because as Sasha said, there's nothing there. There really is nothing there. So John, I want to thank you so much for that. And let's just jump ahead here, actually, to the other comment, which was from Filip, that I really want to go over as well. Here it is. This is a comment on Talking Insomnia number 40. And actually, let me preface this by something. I have this like two go-to analogies that I often talk about. One is my toddler analogy, which is basically like this, that when a toddler tries to get your attention by like really acting up, like kicking, screaming, pulling your legs and things like that, and you give them attention, then you're kind of reinforcing it. You're giving them what they want. So sometimes the best thing to do is kind of just ignore the toddler when they're not getting any attention. Then they stop bothering you and they start going to play somewhere, right? But you can have an extinction burst, actually. When you stop ignoring them initially, they can act up even more. But anyway, that's the toddler analogy. And then we have the brain train analogy. Basically goes like this. Let's say you're trying to warn somebody about something that you think is really important, and your friend who you're trying to warn just doesn't want to listen. Then you go like, hey, you got to listen. You really start like trying to get their attention. You have something really important to tell them. It's only when they say, okay, what is it? When they start listening that you're like, oh, they're listening. Okay, I don't have to shout so much. At some point, it became apparent to me that there was some paradox here. Like, how should you react? Should you try to like ignore thoughts that are like bothersome, or should you like try to sit and listen? Something. Keep that in mind as we read this comment from Filip, because I think he really was onto this. So let's read this. Hi, Daniel. Again, great video with Namita. I just listened to the podcast of Brooke Castillo. I learned a lot from Brooke Castillo, and without her, she's the founder of the Life Coach School. Great material on her podcast. I listened to her talk about anxiety. Very interesting indeed, as you said. She says, as you do too, we cannot suppress, push away, resist, avoid, challenge our thoughts, but instead we need to let our mind know we are listening. I completely understand that, but my question is, can we ignore or skip our thoughts, or is it better always to reply to our mind? Maybe it sounds a bit ridiculous, but personally, I find it a long sentence if we need to say always, thanks mind for this anxiety thought, but I'm okay, bye now. I have a lot of anxiety feelings one day. To say this long sentence every time, can we say just simply in short, okay, bye now, or even just ignore it or skip the thought? I'm just a bit confused what to say to my mind every time when I'm having anxiety. I know at night it's different when we're hyper aroused. Then we need to do something relaxing when we have racing thoughts. But I mean, during the day, when we're conscious. Thanks again. Having a nice week. Looking forward to your video, Filip. Okay, so this is exactly, what kind of the paradox is. Like, how do you reconcile these? Like, when can you just identify a thought that you find is kind of like, this is kind of not a thought that I want to hold on to? When can you just say, ignore it, dismiss it like you do the toddler? And when do you need to kind of listen to the thought, And here's how I think about it. I think these are, like, again, two principally different ways to, what's the word I'm looking for? To approach thoughts that are not helpful to you, thoughts that are kind of bothersome, right? When the thought is, you can, let me put it this way, you can always start by just dismissing it. Like you said, Filip, you identify a thought that's bothersome, like oh no, I had coffee, I'm not gonna be able to sleep. And you know that I don't think that's true, actually. And then you can just say like, no, I'm dismissing that thought, go away, And here's the thing, that can often work perfect. You can just kind of dismiss a thought, like you say, well, no, I don't want to listen to that. That doesn't make any sense, bye-bye. Here's the thing, if that just brings you kind of relief right there and then, and you don't think about it again, perfect. It was not a very, your brain wasn't really concerned. It wasn't really trying to warn you. It was just kind of pinging your radar, like giving you a suggestion, like maybe this is a problem. You're like, no, it's not a problem. And then that's it. It's off the radar. You can, you can often dismiss the thought just like that, But here's the but. But when that thought becomes sticky, then you have to go the other direction, okay? So let's use the same example. Let's say we have the coffee example there, and you say, nah, I've had coffee many times, and that's that great. But then the thought comes back again. But wait a minute, you had like a little bit more coffee than usual. Then you go like, oh, that's just fine, go away thought. But then it comes again and again and again. Now you can't dismiss it anymore, because now it is that warning and not listening, warning, not listening. Then the brain tries to warn and warn and warn you even more, right? So now you have to listen. Now you have to really like listen to what the brain says. You maybe write it down and maybe imagine. This is the best one, I think, is imagine the thing it's trying to warn you about, go to that place the brain is trying to warn you about, then you're showing the brain that you're listening, and it will feel no reason to warn you. So I hope this was clear, Philip. I actually wrote a text reply as well, but dismissing and listening are kind of two principally different things. You can try to dismiss any thoughts you want, but if it gets sticky, better to listen. Cool. We have some live comments. Oh, Christopher. Oh, yes, that is true. You know, Christopher, I thought about you, and let me actually. I knew you were going to send a question, and I didn't see. Let me search through my inbox here and see if I can find it right now. Christopher. There it is, actually. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you were live, Christopher, so I could do this right now. Because I did miss it. I'm very sorry about that. Let me just copy, paste it in here. It's pasted, and I'm just gonna increase the font size so we can read it together. Here we go. Okay, perfect. Let's see, am I sharing my screen? No, I'm not. Okay, Christopher, here we go. Let's read this together. Hello, Daniel. This is Christopher. I'm a competitive weightlifter. Yes, I remember that. You might remember me from the summer when I was keeping in touch with you about my insomnia. At the start of the fall, when I moved into my apartment in college, my insomnia for the large part went away. Sleep was never on my mind, and I barely thought about sleep. I sent you an update email about my progress. However, ever since I moved back home for winter break, insomnia has resurfaced. For the past couple of days, the patterns have been similar. I hop into bed around 2, 2:30, watch TV until 3, 3:30, and then turn everything off and try to sleep. I usually fall into light sleep pretty quickly, about 15 minutes for about an hour, wake up, then fall back into another light sleep, takes me about another 15 minutes, only to wake up again in an hour. At this point, it's 5 a.m., and I'm pressured to sleep since the morning is on its way. Luckily, I've been able to fall asleep at around this time and sleep for about 5 hours before waking up again around 10 a.m. I then usually fall back to sleep for 2-3 hours for a total of about 8-9 hours of broken sleep. I know this is not as bad as others on this channel have experienced. However, I want to wake up earlier to get chores and studying, taking the MCAT next March. Wow. Instead of spending hours in bed trying to sleep. Any suggestions? Could it be the environment, bad memories from past insomnia that could be triggering this return of insomnia? Also, I have a lifting competition coming up after the winter break. So I'm always thinking that I need good quality sleep to let my body recover for the next day's training session. And I feel as if broken sleep is not a restorative or a straight sleep. Could this be an issue? Thank you. Okay, so we have two different things going on here. One is Christopher was doing pretty well and then moved back home again, having a lot of trouble sleeping. And then the weight, like the competition coming up, you know, what are our thoughts on that one? So I want to start here that let's talk about attribution. This is very, very important. So what you attribute a night of good sleep to or a night of little sleep to, super, super important, because it you know, doesn't matter if you slept well or didn't sleep well. If you attribute it correctly, it will take you on a very, very good path, okay? So when you sleep well, it is super important to attribute that to nothing, And here's the thing, you know, good sleep only happens when you're not trying to sleep. And when I say not trying to sleep, it's the same thing as being okay with being awake. You know, you're not trying to sleep. If you really, really was trying, holding on, like you were like, I have to get at least this amount or not a minute less, you would not sleep well. Absolutely impossible. So when you sleep well, it's always because you were okay with being awake. You know, you were not trying to hold on to sleep. And why is this so important? Because when you sleep well, and you attribute that to something that involves effort. Let's say you slept well and you think, oh, that's because I went running yesterday. Of course, that takes you down the path of effort. That takes you down to like these connections in your brain, like I have to do this to sleep well. And the next day you try to like replicate that. You're like, I slept well because I went running yesterday. Good, I'm gonna go running again today. Now there's effort. Now you're doing something to try to sleep. Now you're holding on. Now you're being resistant again. Then you don't sleep well, okay? So so it's very important, always attribute good sleep to being okay with having insomnia, quote unquote, being okay with being awake, and always attribute little sleep to something that is obvious, okay? Good sleep, always because you were trying less. Little sleep, always because there was some hyperarousal. You were somewhat tense, for some reason. You were kind of like, you were more, you wanted to sleep more. And in your case, Christopher, there was something obvious there. You had, moved back to where your parents live. Maybe you had more trouble sleeping there in the past. It doesn't really matter as long as you attribute it to something obvious. Like, I was a little bit anxious. I was stressed. Something was new. And the beauty of that is the same thing, that if you attribute little sleep to something obvious, then there's no mystery. There's nothing to look for. There's nothing to figure out, nothing to ponder, nothing to think about. Because if you start thinking, I didn't sleep well, maybe it was because of this, maybe because of that, that leads you down to another rabbit hole of figuring out, right? So attribute good sleep to not trying, and attribute little sleep to something obvious. And I think you have something obvious there, Christopher. So I would just say attribute it to that, okay? Super important. Number two, as people have heard me say like 1.5 million times, but it's worth repeating. It's super important. Insomnia is not a thing that kind of just comes out of the blue and then you have to like push it away. Rather, insomnia is a product of your thoughts, and the thoughts are maintaining it. It's maintained by your insomnia rather than something that you have to like push away. And those insomnia cannot survive without attention. It's kind of like a myth, if you stop believing in something, like you stop believing in I don't know, the tooth fairy, there is no tooth fairy, right? And so if you stop believing in insomnia in a way, if you stop paying any attention to it, it will go away. And where am I going with this? Well, I'm going with this in the direction of timing here. Christopher, that you're in bed by 2:30. That's kind of one time you talk about time. 3:30, that's the second time. We got 15 minutes. You got about an hour, another 15 minutes. It's 5 a.m. And then we have 5 hours. Then we have 10 a.m. Then we have 2 to 3 hours. Then we have another annotation time. There's 10. There are 10 places in this message where we have a notation of time, either the clock time or an estimation of how long you slept. That is attention. That is attention. That is the reason insomnia can go on, okay? So it is super important to go in that timeless, to walk the timeless way, it's great to have a set wake up time, which I think you want anyway, Christopher. Don't be afraid to pick something, pick 8, pick 9, pick 7, whatever you want, pick something, and then maybe give yourself, 8, 9 hour opportunity for sleep. So let's say you pick 7 a.m. Then you say, okay, I'm going to stop checking the time at 10. I'm going to stop checking the time at 10. And if I feel sleepy, I sleep. If I don't sleepy, I do something I enjoy. That's the timeless way. The easiest part is just not checking any clocks. Perfect. The little bit trickier is not doing the calculations in your head, but that's pretty easy too. Whenever your mind says, I think it's 4, or I think I slept 20 minutes, just throw a whole bunch of doubt there so that you really don't know what time it is overnight, but deploy that timeless way even further. Don't keep track of how many days you've had trouble sleeping. Don't try to predict when it's going to stop. Go completely timeless. There's a lot of strength there. There's such power there. Like when you don't know the time, it's such a powerful way of letting go of control. Super helpful. Okay, so I think we talked about those important things. Now let's move ahead to this like a little bit of anticipatory insomnia or a secondary attachment actually. So when you have trouble sleeping, there's an attachment to sleep. That's if you didn't have some kind of desire to sleep, you would have trouble sleeping, right? So this kind of the primary attachment, but then you have secondary attachments, which is like, I need to sleep this amount of time so that I feel less depressed, so that I perform better, so that I'm focused. This is now a secondary attachment. And those secondary attachments, they further increase the pressure to sleep. Not only do you want to sleep well for kind of general, I just want to sleep well, but now there's a secondary outcome attached to it, which in your case, Christopher, now is this weightlifting competition. So how can you, reduce the pressure to sleep? Well, it really is loosening up that secondary attachment. And how can you do that? How can you get to a place where you're like, okay, it is actually not that important for me in terms of this competition to sleep this amount or to sleep a certain. You can do detective work. You can look in the past and find evidence where that's time where you didn't sleep much and you did great weightlifting, or that other time where you slept good and you didn't do great. Both of them are evidence that sleep doesn't pay that much, isn't that important. I also, you can also look through the success stories and you'll find plenty of examples of people saying that they were surprised that they could do fine on much less sleep than they thought. Particularly, if you Google Insomnia Inside Brittany Marathon, or you just look through probably success stories playlist is probably the best one. We had somebody on the channel, this was probably a good year ago, who was a triathlete. He was doing a triathlon, like one of those crazy things, like a marathon after like swimming for a crazy amount and like something like that. An Ironman triathlon, I think it was called. And she literally didn't sleep the night before. She was close to canceling, but then she did it and she did good. And she like, I did fine. And she was shocked. She did really, really well. And I was so happy for her because she had shown herself beyond a shadow of a doubt that she can do really, really well. She could perform really, really well after literally, she said, the worst night of sleep in the entire year for her. That was Brittany. And so, again, when you loosen that secondary attachment, there's less pressure to sleep and you do really well. So Christopher, if you're live here, any follow-up questions, please let me know. Sorry for the delay, and hope that was helpful. Cool. Now, let's move on here. This is Adam who has the last question. This is Adam who wrote the following. I've been struggling mightily with lack of sleep over the last couple of years, averaging about 4 or 5 hours per night. The following highlights concurrent concerns of mine with regards to ongoing cognitive symptoms. I've recently been misreading words. The Saturday before last, I was scanning the internet to see which college games were on. The first one I saw was Auburn versus Miami, and then scrolled along for other games. I decided to come back to check the Auburn-Miami game, but when I did, I read Auburn versus Alabama. It was pretty shocking. I think something similar happened once a couple of months back, but I brushed it off since that Saturday. 10 days ago, I've similarly misread something every day. Sometimes the words are highly similar and sometimes they're not. For instance, today I mistook the word daughter for sister and the phrase Lori Laughlin's daughter. And the other day, the phrase was something like, I'm with her, but in place of her, I read beer. It's always very odd because I could have sworn that I saw the word I originally perceived to be there. When the words are dissimilar, I have to read the sentences 2 or 3 times before I realize my mistake. Please understand that I went from virtually never doing this to doing it every day without fail. I have also confused words in my internal dialogue. For example, I meant to use the word envious, but instead used the word empathic. Having read that the aforementioned symptoms can be an indication of stroke or tumor, I went to walk-in medical clinic and a CAT scan was recommended. The scan's only finding was that the nurse practitioner assessed a Chiari malformation, a condition in which the brain tissue extends into the spinal canal. My general practitioner has doubts about the diagnosis and is currently assessing the scan results. It is worth noting that although I've struggled with staying asleep for quite some time now, I have been particularly poor recently. I had averaging 4.5 hours of sleep per night, and the sleep was not uninterrupted. Typically get to sleep okay, but then begin to wake up. To counter this, I implemented to no avail solid sleep hygiene practices. Also important is the fact that I've been diagnosed with mild sleep apnea, prescribed an oral device, which appears to work, and it's worth noting that I suffer from clinically diagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder with primary mental obsessions, which means that there's no real physical or external component to my compulsion. It all takes place in my head. Although having suffered through the years from various subtypes of this affliction, hypochondriac OCD has really taken root over the last couple of years. My most prominent hypochondriac fear is that of early onset dementia. This is more pronounced due to the fact that over the last year and a half, I have being foggy-headed, struggling with the word, name recall, and short-term memory issues. Now, of course, there's the reading issue adding to the fear. Months back, I did a battery of tests from which the neuropsychologist saw no reason for my fear of dementia. Having informed him of most recent problems, his assessment is unchanged. He attributes the reading difficulties to lack of sleep. Being unsure of what to make of this, I thought I would present you with my symptoms and await your feedback. Thank you. Very well. Well, thank you, Adam, for submitting this question. You know, as always, nothing here is medical advice. Anybody who's concerned about your health, talk to your doctor. But, you know, this guy, I want to say that this is one of the most common concerns that we hear from people that have trouble sleeping. The like that brain fog and the kind of memory issues, you know, not remembering the name of familiar objects is a common one. Struggling to, like, you know, you go to the car and you don't have your keys and you're like something like that, or mixing up words, things of that nature, very common. And I think there could be many reasons for this. One is that, you know, sure, like if you simply sleep less than, you know, your body wants to sleep ideally, right? You know, sure, that could cause some trouble sleeping, but even more so, I think the like, you know, keeping the, you know, when the brain is in that like obsessive state, kind of always working, always thinking, always pondering, always figuring out, that in itself, I think, can make it, you know, a little bit more tricky to like find the right words and read. Like, it just kind of how should I put it? Like, the brain is very kind of gets exhausted by that, like the obsessing that could play a role. Attention too, like, you know, once it's kind of like anything in life, like you say, you install a bike rack on your car, and then suddenly you see like, oh, well, all kinds of people have bike racks. You start paying attention to the fact that you're mixing up words, and then you find that, oh, you do that all the time, and then it appears like, oh, this is new, this is something progressive, but in fact, you may have done that for a long, long time, and you just never paid attention to it, which happens a lot when it comes to like breathing. Like, people start noticing that, oh, I stopped breathing when I'm awake. Like, I forgot to take a breath, you know. And the more you pay attention to it, the more you have. That's a very, very common one. And then you have OCD. You have a fear of early onset dementia, which makes the brain kind of like on the lookout for things like this, which again amplifies it. So yeah, I think I just want to say that there's nothing here that is unusual or strange or uncommon in the insomnia world. You know, I think always the key to change is really education, you know, like learning and understanding, and then letting go becomes much easier. So Adam, I want to thank you so much for submitting this question. I hope this was helpful to you and everybody else. Thanks, Christopher, and thanks, Philip, of course, and John. And for anyone out there that finds all you need on this channel, that is perfect. If you need a little bit of support and you don't want to go at it alone, if you would like to join a nice community of peers who are working with myself and Coach Michael using pre-recorded video classes, as well as you know, a Zoom classes where we are talking together, join our self-coaching program, or consider it. It's I think could be really helpful. And then also, you have BedTyme as well. It's super convenient. It's an app. You have a coach, which is myself, and it's been really helpful to a lot of people. Let's see, we have Christopher. Thank you. No, thank you, Christopher. Anytime. You know, by the way, you've gotten there one time where you were kind of unattached, you were sleeping well. You'll get there again, and with every time you have this like wave of insomnia, and you go to a place where you're doing better again, you have maybe another wave. Those waves they become weaker over time, and happen less and less frequently. When they do happen, you often feel like, oh no, it's back, what's going to happen? But just deploy everything you learn, and you do really well. And let us know how that goes in January. Let us know how the competition goes, and don't cancel it, okay? Don't cancel it, because then you'll have proof that insomnia has power over you or whatever. So, oh, cool. It's been getting better actually last couple. Fantastic, Christopher. Super, super glad to hear this. All right, perfect place to end this live. And I'll be back with some insights tomorrow. And I think we have an interview Thursday, and then open class again Friday. Okay, bye now.